experienced painters can learn from this exercise, because the things that we tend to do is we worry about how much paint we're using, and we tend to not mix enough paint, not mix enough puddles, and then not understand what consistency we need to apply to the paper. So if you've seen the value scale video, you probably have created this value scale with the different consistencies. These are also useful color wheels that have a value on the back. And, you know, typically what I do is I just do 2, 4, 6, 8, because there's so many values there, you really don't have to be concerned with that many. So if we say that this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, then that's pretty much a full value scale. When mixing paints, number one, I would say use a cheap brush. It's really hard on your brushes if you're dipping into the paint frequently. And if you use a cheap brush, a well-used brush like this one here, then this one is what, a Princeton Snap that I've had. I guess was one of my first brushes that I bought, and I use that frequently to mix my paint. The other thing I see a lot is little tiny puddles. If you have a palette like this, it's almost impossible to mix a good puddle of paint. I like this. I don't even know where I got this. I think I bought it at a dollar store, because each of these wells is nice and big, and it helps you understand what size should your puddle be when you're mixing paint. And the other thing I sometimes give my students is a little picture. I'll see if I can find it, that shows you the size of the puddle you should be making. And the other thing that I just realized I've got here is I've got this grayscale value finder as well. Now sometimes these are backwards, like this one, this is a value 1. Well, that would be based on an oil painter. In our case, that's probably a value 10. So there's quite a few options for value scales that you can use. So number one, if I want to mix up a light value that I would use in the sky, a T consistency, the first thing I'm going to do is fill one of these wells with some water. So I've got a good amount of water in here, and then I'm going to go into my paint. In this case, I'm going to use ultramarine. And I'm going to add some ultramarine to this well. Oh, I didn't pre-spray my well here, but pre-spray my paint, I mean. But that is, when I go like this, although my palette is a little discolored, that is the consistency of the paint that I'm going to apply. It's not this area here. And if you have an old palette, what ends up happening is they tend to bead up, and then everything goes into a puddle that deep, and you don't see really what the very light value is. So I've added lots of water. I've added a little bit of pigment, and I think this is going to be a little too light. I'm just going to add a tiny bit more pigment to it. And I filled up the well. It's moving quite quickly, and I'm going to use that value. Now, if that dries, in order to go to the next value, I'm actually skipping one value, because if you end up painting over top of this with, let's say we just go into the well 2 more times, we're trying to get to this level here, it's not enough difference between the first iteration and the next iteration. So we really have to go up a couple of points in the values. So this one here is a value 2, then we have to go to let's see what that looks like here. If this is a value 2, then we have to go to this 4. So that's the value that I'm trying to get at that level. I would say you're going in at least 5 to 7 more times into your pigment, and you're putting the whole brush in as well. That's another thing that's important to watch out for is, are you just touching the top of the pigment, or are you putting your whole brush and grabbing the paint like that? Now in that demonstration, I know probably went a little bit too far, because if I look at the value of this, it's gone up quite a bit. What I'm going to do here is I might have a little bit too much here, but let's try it out. So we want to get to that level. Okay, I think we might be okay actually, because by the time this dries, that is going to be much lighter than what we see there. The other question is, if I apply, this is dry, if I apply this color over top of what I already have, is that going to look nice and smooth, or is it going to create a situation where it looks muddy? Now, it depends on how dry your paper is when you do that, but I think it's a good test to see. Now I've done, we did 2, we're doing 4, now I'm going to do 6. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for the pigment to start to slow down, to not move as much. See how it's slowing down there and it's not moving as much on the palette? And again, I'm going in, really getting my brush into there. The other thing that it's starting to do is we're starting to see some of these bubbles. And that tells me that it's a thicker, creamier consistency. So that if this was tea and this was milk, then this is going to be my cream. Okay. And all 3 of those, if your paper is on a tilt, will still create a bead. We'll talk about beads in another session, but there's enough paint on there that's moving that you still create a bead. Now that's not quite dry, but what I might do is I might switch to another well so that we can see this level 2, 4, 6. And when I apply the other line to it, yeah, it's not quite dry. It's still, yeah, it's still damp. So I'm going to go to a new well, and I'm going to mix my 8 value. You still surprisingly need water. The paint will not blend well with other colors if you don't have enough water in it. And sometimes at this level, here, I'll leave this over here. I'm going to go in, and now I'm looking for a sticky consistency. I want it to move way slower than it was before. And I actually want to see that it, even when I do this, it still is staying on the palette. It's not moving too much at this point. It's got to get to the point where it's almost, and see how many more bubbles that are there as well. Now I know I'm getting to that point. If I go like this, it doesn't flow back in either. It's staying where it is. That's our number 8 consistency. We'll apply that, okay? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take this one. I'm gonna dry off my brush. I rinsed it off, and now I'm drying it off, and I'm gonna go back into this number 4, and I'm gonna make sure that I've gone 2 values down. And then I'll leave this puddle here, and we'll put that on that one. The last consistency that we're going to do today is almost just going right into the palette. And it's really gonna stick we still have some movement here. This time it's going to be sticking to the bottom. So I think I've got to our number 6. Now I want it so it's hard to move it here. Keep going, make sure this is still in view. Okay, almost there. Still moving around. Okay, more paint. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, and at this level, this is when you start to be able to do some great dry brush effects. You can do it at an earlier level, but when you apply this, especially if you go fast, you start getting some of these dry brush effects. Okay, so that's our 8 consistency. And then our final consistency is just going into the palette on its own. I didn't add any more water, and everything I put down is a dry brush. There we go. The next thing we have to do is we have to apply this mixture on top of the one that we have there. And I think it's dry enough. And we should have jumped 2 values there. Not sure if we did. Probably not quite enough. And then here, same thing. We're going to apply this value onto here. Okay, might have still been too wet. This is definitely still too wet. But that's kind of what you want to see. You want to see a jump in value. And let's say you're doing a cloudscape and you do your sky in this color, and then you want your clouds to be this color. It has to jump that level. It can't just be the same color. I just wanted to take a minute to explain the jumping up of 2 values. Here we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and straight from the well. And the reason that is important is if I only jumped a single value, I wouldn't get enough coverage over the first wash, and therefore it would start to look messy because the first wash would be showing through. So in order to get effective coverage, you need to jump 2 or 3 values. I am putting together a second video on skies and water where we will actually use this lesson in preparation for that. So stay tuned for that lesson. Hope you're enjoying my channel, and we will see you later.